Hi everybody, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple. Thanks for watching, and if you can, please remember to leave a thumbs up, like, and comment on the video when you're done, because I like to engage with everybody who watches my content. And if you can, please check out the Patreon campaign where you can help to keep this channel going for the foreseeable future. So we got a game that's on everybody's mind at the moment, at least if you're a Eurogamer, Tabannusi, Builders of Sorry, slight technical glitch there. Tabannusi is, I think, now the 6th game that begins with T in the board and dice lineup. Essentially a bunch of Euro games that all manipulate dice in some fashion to do Euro mechanics and get victory points. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to really explain much more than that because neither one of these really does a great job of representing the theme in question. It's just, this is the setting and it happens to begin with T, therefore we can go with it. But Tabannusi is definitely hot on people's list by Daniel Tassini and David Spada, so people are interested to know whether this is a worthy addition to the lineup. Now, just as a quick summary of all the T games, I own 2 of them. Teotihuacan, easily my number 1, although is a bit bloated at the moment. Tekenu, my number 2. The first expansion probably bloated it up a bit too much, and it is a bit of a pig's ear to get the rules back down in your head when you haven't played it for a while, but it's still really good fun with that obelisk mechanic and the dice. Zolkin, if you count that as a T game, which I do, would sit at my number 3. Not played it in a while, but I enjoy it nonetheless. Then after that would probably be Trismegistus, which is a decent fun Euro game if you can understand the first thing that's going on when you're playing it. It's an absolute mind bender in terms of it's like trying to understand the game, period. And then straight after that, right at the bottom, is Taiwan Tinsuyu, which I think I gave a review last year. I think I did it in a compilation review last year. That one, it wasn't intuitive, the mechanics just didn't work for me. I thought there was balancing issues, and that board state was just, it gave me visual headaches staring at that board trying to decipher where things were, and like chronic analysis paralysis. It really just didn't work for me, that one. And I know everybody's got different ideas of where they rank these T games. The question is, where does Tabannusi sit in my lineup? Well, let's find out. Set in ancient Mesopotamia, a cradle of civilization at a time when the location of Ur was a coastal region, players worked to build the great city of Ur, expand its districts, and establish themselves as powerful builders. This features a stunning board showing the city of Ur divided into 5 regions, each tied to a specific color die. There are 3 building districts, 1 temple, and 1 port. Each turn, your worker will activate one of these districts. When activating a district, you take a die from the district, which matches the color and serves 2 functions. The die itself is a resource of its color, and the value determines which district your worker will activate on the following turn. Through various actions, you will be able to expand your influence in the various districts, expanding construction sites and turning them eventually into buildings to score valuable victory points. However, other players may decide to build these for you, which is not necessarily a good thing. But you will also exert your influence in the temple district in order to earn the king's favor. In the port district, you can obtain ships with important abilities and for scoring potential victory points elsewhere. You must spend your actions wisely and always make sure you keep an eye on the general timing of the game. The moment a district is emptied of dice, a scoring will occur, and 5 of these scorings will take place before eventually the game ends and a final scoring takes place. So each district could potentially score more than once, or even not at all before the final scoring takes place. You'll juggle around these different districts, deciding which path to victory you're going to take, and eventually, of course, the person with the most points.
Of course!
Tabannusi quotes a 2-hour duration on the backs. Just 2 hours, nothing else. That is pretty accurate though, particularly for your first game with new players. It's going to be a bit of a learning curve for them. 2 players can get this game done in about 90 minutes, but getting it done any quicker is probably wishful thinking. There's more dice that scale with players, and the board state scales with players, but still, you are looking at a good 2 hours typically for a game, possibly longer actually, more closer to 2.5 if you've got 4 players playing. The board game does scale, but not as great as I would like. With 2 players, you don't interact that much with each other, but you interact a little bit, even though there's not a huge amount of space in the districts. With 3 players, you flip the board over, and then you've got too much space for 3 players. That interaction is probably even slightly less than 2-player even, although, again, this can change depending on the types of technologies on the ships or the ziggurat bonuses that come out. It may influence players to build on other people's territories. but then when you have 4 players, it really does get a lot more interactive. Of course, that also means the game gets longer, which is a little bit of a problem. I prefer to play this with 2 players, frankly, because a little bit of interaction is fine, but at least I know the game's going to finish in about 90 minutes when people know what they're doing. But then 4 players, the game does drag on and on and on a bit, especially when you're not achieving a ton on your turn, particularly if you have to spend a whole turn just trying to get enough dice so that you can do what you wanted to do the next turn. It's a very tight game. So the solo mode as well can take a fair bit of time, although that's mainly because, well, we'll get onto that a little bit later. You're also in a situation where there can be a lot of analysis paralysis and downtime because of the changing board state. People may come along and nick the dice that you wanted to take, which means your architect now has possibly no chance of going to where you wanted to put it in the next round. On top of that, you may have a state or district where, okay, there's some construction contracts, there's those buildings, that's fine, I know what I'm going to do next turn, and then somebody decides to build on top of it, or convert the contracts into buildings, or build a garden next door to you, or do something to hinder you, at which point you've then got to rethink your entire turn again. There's a lot of opportunities for people to just freeze up entirely over what it is they want to do, particularly as the resource management is pretty tight in this game, so be prepared for that, particularly with 4. Now, for ease of play, this is usually the bit I fear the most with these T games. You know, some of these T games can be a bit of a bugbear to try and learn. You know, Teotihuacan and Tequeño are no exception. They're complex games, and there's a lot of rules to absorb, particularly in Teotihuacan. But with Tabannusi, this rulebook, for the most part, about 80% of it is actually pretty good. There's not a huge amount of rules to teach per se, it's just you really need to understand how they interact with each other. But the main rulebook does give a lot of pictorial representation for not only the setup, which is probably the longest setup page diagram lot I've seen ever. Like, everything has a pictorial representation. I mean, good, I want that kind of thing, but still, wow. But then it's got the key concepts with a ton of pictures. It's then got the turn structure with a ton of pictures. Everything in this game is explained with bold text in places where it needs to be, bullet point numbered lists, picture representation with diagrams. It's a really, really good rulebook. I think this is probably, for the multiplayer at least, one of the best rulebooks I've seen for the T series of games. So credit where it's due. Where this game falters, it crashes and burns horrifically, is when you get to the solo mode. I will be the first person to say that not every Euro game needs a solo mode. The T games are no exception to this. But this solo mode, it's weird. The rulebook is like fantastic until it gets to the solo mode. Then it basically decides, you know what, pictures aren't really that interesting. Let's just give them a wall of text and bullet point lists and priority diagrams. It's like, oh great, that's great. So, you want further proof. What's the playthrough that me and Paul Grogan did on his channel on Gaming Rules when we tried to go through the solo mode in this? It is a fiddly affair. Very fiddly. It's a lot of stuff you got to consider. It is not intuitive in the slightest, and we had questions that we couldn't even answer on the live stream. It was a very problematic affair, and the main reason for this is not just because, priority lists in solo modes do my head in. Like, when your guy is at A, do B and C and D, but when they're at B, do X, Y, and Z, and then when they're at C, go 1, 2, and 3, and when they're at D, go fly off to Venus and align with Mercury. It's like, what?
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
There's so many different ways that the AI acts depending on what it is you're doing, where they are, what time of day it is, whether I'm leaning over a bit like this. It's like, come on. It gets ridiculous. And the rulebook isn't very good at explaining the stuff because it's weird. It's like if you have, let's say you had an orchestra playing a musical piece. They start off really strong and they carry on and it's a very beautiful tune. They're playing in, everybody's putting in their effort. And then as soon as they get to the last chorus, they kind of just sort of slum it out, and then some of them get bored and just, put their instruments down and walk away. And it just kind of like, oh, what, you couldn't be bothered? Feels like that with the solo mode. All the pictures die at this point. There's no pictorial representation to illustrate the stuff that's going on with the solo mode other than the anatomy of the various solo cards that you use. That's it. Come on! The same quality that was in the multiplayer section of the rulebook should have been repeated in the solo mode section as well to make it a lot easier to understand. As a result, I know that anytime I would ever get asked to play the solo mode of this, it's gonna be a complete
John Spartan, you are fined 1 credit for a violation of the verbal morality statute.
Now for tactics and strategy, this game is kind of what you'd expect really from a tea game. It's, here's some dice, manipulate it, do some stuff, level up on tracks, get some victory points. It's very dry, there's not a huge amount of what I would call exciting stuff here, but there is a little bit of player interaction with the idea that somebody might put the contracts down to build somewhere, but it's not necessarily their building. If somebody has claim to those contracts, then building someone else's stuff is cheaper for you to build. But then you're getting the benefit of having the building, whereas the opponent is just leveling up on a couple of tracks for it. The same goes where if you build next to someone else's garden that they've claimed, a similar thing can happen. But then if you're willing to pay all the resources to build your own building, you then get the victory point potential for that building. And the idea that players can interact in this fashion does make for an interesting game experience. Now, the actual thing that you're doing, building these tiles on the board and putting little gardens and rivers next to each other, sounds more fun than it actually is. It's, again, just a very dry experience that we've seen before, nothing particularly unique here. The ships are quite cool though. I like having the different, what you might as well call them technologies, that's essentially what they are. But you grow on a ship and you get a different technology ability. But these feel like a lot of effort to get. Not only do you need the resources to get the ship claim in the first place, and you have to use gold, which is not the easiest thing to come by in this game, but on top of that, some of the abilities are what I would expect from a technology ability. So when I do this particular action, which already took me a lot of effort to do, I get this extra bonus. Cool, that's what I want. A lot of the abilities tend to be, though, that when you do X, if you're willing to spend even more resources, you can do Y. It's like, no, the amount of effort I just went to do X, I should get the Y for free, not have to spend even more resources. And remember when I said resources were tight? Oh my word, they're tight in this game. There are not a huge amount of ways to get dice other than taking them off the barges when you move your worker around. There's a few little bonus squares that you can use, and trust me, I like to use them on a regular basis, because every action in the game requires a minimum of 2 of that colour die. And it's not easy to have a ton of dice in your possession, particularly as when it gets to the scoring phase, you run the risk of them actually going away, which, even though you get a little bit of a bonus for that happening, still feels pretty punishing. You know, I can level once on this little mastery track, or I could have a full functioning resource die. I know which I'd prefer. And those mastery tracks, not particularly interesting really. In fact, I dare say I just pretty much ignore them. You can go all the way up to mastery level 4 in these, and if it's very much Nick the Knizia scoring thing. When your markers all get to the same level, you get a bonus, and then at the end of the game you can score based on where these markers are. Leveling them up though is a pain. A lot of it is dictated by what the opponent does. It's very hard to do it yourself. And honestly, I find that as long as you get one of them that's your focus of the game up to level 2, that's kind of all you need to do. The amount of effort and time it takes to get to Mastery 3 and 4 is ridiculous. I know, I ignore every single ship and ziggurat bonus that is dictated by having your Mastery markers high, because it's just a pain to do. And honestly, even if you do get to Mastery 3 and 4, if you've spent all the time and resources doing that, you probably don't have a lot of buildings on the board to make the use of that extra point bonus. I find that if you've got a bunch of buildings and Mastery level 2, you're pretty much doing a good job as it is. And certainly those bonuses that you get for having all your markers on the same line, I'm sorry, if you're able to get all 3 of your markers that high up those tracks, I want more than just an extra gold, please. I want a lot more points than what it offers. I just don't find them that particularly useful as a concept of the game. Don't ignore the ziggurats though, they're definitely worth it, particularly on certain cases like points for buildings. They really do get you a lot of points if you invest heavily in a particular ziggurat. But again, it takes time that you're not spending doing the building. So it's definitely a tight game. It's definitely going to be for people who not necessarily want a punishing experience, but certainly want a more restrictive one. This kind of borders the line for how restrictive I want it to be. It's not too restricted, but I also don't feel like I can do a multitude of options. There are some times when I go to a location and it's like, I can't do very much here. I guess I'll just do this twice. You know, it's not too restricted, but it's also not particularly, like, it's not an array of options either. Now for aesthetics, this game is, I mentioned in the description when I was talking about the overview, it says stunning. I'm not sure stunning is the word I would use to describe this game aesthetically. It's fairly bland. The artwork on the board is pretty standard, as you would expect from a Euro game. I mean, it's lots of square grids everywhere, and you're putting tiles on them, which the constructions are fairly basic. The gardens and the rivers kind of remind me of low-quality textures from old fantasy PC games. The dice are fine, but let's face it, I think you have to work hard in order to mess up dice these days. And the tokens are just general cardboard. There's no specific, like, deluxe resources. There's no artwork that's really getting me to go, oh yeah, that's beautiful or anything. It's just kind of run-of-the-mill. Now, I do like the fact that they give you all those massive trays in order to build the buildings up. So you do get a nice little sort of 3D look to the game, where every time you build a building, you put those 3D bits on, you can connect them together, and you pop your little building on top. Although it does look kind of weird. You've got this huge, like, 3 long brown setup of, you know, plastic trays, and then you just put your tiny little building on top to say it's yours. It's the dimensions are a little bit odd, but yeah, that's a minor nitpick. So yeah, it works. The graphic design is fine. It's not the most intuitive, but once you get used to the rules, it does start to click a bit. And thankfully, a lot of it is not like tons of it around. And there's a useful reference guide at the back of the book if you want to get the references and sort of like the iconography down. It explains on multiple pages what all the different decree cards, the Harbour Master tiles, the urban cards, the ship tiles, etc. do. So honestly, once you've, like, if you look at something and you don't quite understand it, the rule book will answer the question, no doubt about that. Going into the theme. It's a tea game by Board and Dice. Did you expect there to be a theme in this game? No, there isn't. This is dry as a bone. You're taking dice. I mean, it's so dry, the dice don't even have a name for the resource. I kid you not. Most games will at least still call it wood, stone, iron or whatever, even if it doesn't really make much difference. But I kid you not, they are just called resource dice. Alright? It's probably not going to zoom, but will it zoom? No, it doesn't matter. But they're called resource dice. Nothing else. There is no indication, other than gold, that any of the resources actually constitute any particular element. That's how dry this game is. They couldn't even be bothered to name the resources. As much little differences it would have made, but still, you can tell that that's like the borderline where it's like, yeah, we really don't care whether this is thematic or not. So it's difficult to really get immersed in this. I don't really necessarily feel like I'm building a city per se, because everybody owns different buildings around the districts. The 3 common districts are exactly the same. They're just 3 different common districts with slightly different bonus squares on them. And when you're expanding the water, it's kind of odd, because you've got these districts, but then the gardens can sort of splay all over the place, and then the water that borders the districts can expand outwards, so you can have more water. I mean, what are you doing? Flooding the districts? Is this how it works? You know, you've got this dry land, and you basically say to your emperor or whoever you're dealing with, it's like, would you mind if we just flooded that part of the district there? I mean, we just need a bit more water there so we can build a garden. And that's the other thing. It builds the garden on top of the water tiles. What, on top of the river tiles or what? Why does it need that? I don't quite get it. There's a few things that just work against the theme here, but honestly, I wasn't exactly going into this with high expectations of a strong theme. I mean, Teotihuacan, Tekenu, you know, honestly, have any of the games really displayed a great theme? Not really, so I'm not exactly going to duck it much here. Longevity is kind of the party piece for this one though. There's a lot of different technology tiles that can come out, and the combinations of them do influence how the game's going to progress. The ziggurat tiles, of which there's sadly only 3 in each game, I wish there was maybe a few more, you know, do also influence what you're doing. I didn't mention before these decree cards, which basically are like, oh, if you can meet this certain condition, you can get this bonus, and it's a one-off like race to the card. Those are decent as well, and they can very drastically influence what you're doing in the game. I really don't think you should ignore the decree cards. You should at least go for one of them. If you can do both, fantastic, although it's quite unlikely you'll do so. But these decree cards require you to really focus on them. Like, one of them requires you to get 8 garden tiles. Good luck doing that on a casual basis. You need to go for those gardens. And so, with all the different ship tiles, with the different player counts, with the different ziggurat tiles, you do end up with some different feeling games from time to time. Now, that's more to do with path to victory and what emphasis people have on ships versus buildings versus ziggurats, for example. It's not that the core mechanisms of the game get very different. Now, if you are a solo lover, then you can also play this solo, but honestly, as I mentioned before, it's a fiddly mess to try and get those rules down. I found that piloting it was just, again, like a lot of these Euro games that try to bolt on solo modes, it just feels like too much faff. And the AI is not the brightest in the world either. I mean, this doesn't simulate a multiplayer opponent very well at all. It goes through a card, it dictates based on what it's pointing at, which action it will try to do, and then if it can't do that, it will do this one. But it does decisions, particularly in the latter part of the game, that are frankly moronic. It honestly does not behave like a multiplayer person does. On the very last turn before the end of the game, when you know the game end is triggered, you'll be like, ooh, I better get some points. How can I get some points? I could do that. That gets me the most points. I'll do it. What can the AI do? I'll put some contract tiles down. There's no way to get any points from that, and you don't get anything from the bonus. I want to put contract tiles down. Contract tiles!
Right.
Seriously, it really is moronic at times. I award it no points, and may God have mercy on its soul. It's really that bad. So, honestly, I don't really see the solo mode impressing a lot of people. So, you might as well scrap that off the table. You're really playing this multiplayer, and as I said, the player scaling's not perfect. I would rather play this with 2 than with 3 and 4. Some people might prefer to play it with 4 rather than 2 or 3. It depends what you want. Do you care whether the game goes on stupidly long, and you just want the most crowded spaces on the board ever? Or do you want the game to kind of cap at about 90 minutes like I do, and still get a little bit of that interaction? Kind of depends what you're going for. The Tabannusi for me is fine. It's a fine game. It does the job. It does give me some entertainment, but it's very specific as to how I want to play it, and it is very dry. And after I'm done with it, I feel like, yeah, that was fine. It did the job, but I'm not screaming for it afterwards. It will probably be a while before it hits the table again. And honestly, if somebody's going to say, oh, let's play one of the T games, I'd rather play these two, frankly. These two eclipse Tabannusi, like, easily in my books, but then so do quite a few other Euros. It's fine, and it stands on its own 2 feet, but I don't think it really sets itself apart from the crowd. It does feel like another one in the T series, but again, it just feels like another T game, and I think this is a problem with the T series of games at the moment, that they are starting to get to that level of repetitiveness. We've had their peaks of the really good ones. Now, every time they bring out a new one, I'm kind of just like, it's more of the same. Where's the unique selling point? This one doesn't really have that much of a unique selling point to it. It just feels like another T game. Not that that's a bad thing. It is not a bad game by any means. I still think this is a decent game. But I'm just not really gonna seek it out, and I feel that if you want to jump into the T series of games, you're probably better off grabbing Teotihuacan, Tzolk'in, or Tekkenu, because I think they are still 3 of the better ones that there is. So this one for me is decent, not great. Do I think it's good enough? Not quite on my scale. I'm giving this one a respectable 6 out of 10. It's good, it's above average, but I just don't feel that people are going to say, oh, this is my favourite of the T series. I'm sure I'll now get 10 comments telling me otherwise. But honestly, if you want to go by the rankings that people have for these T games, more often than not, you see these ones feature highly, as on with Tzolk'in, and I just don't think this one's going to kind of match it. It's going to be fine on its own, and if you're a completionist, by all means grab it. I'm sure you'll have good fun with it, and I've had fun with it. I've enjoyed my plays of it. I'm now kind of done and can move on. So that's it for me on this video. If you like what you see, please remember to leave a thumbs up and comment. What do you think of this game? What do you think of the T series? Rank your T games, all 6 of them now, in order of your preference, and let everybody else know what you think of them. Don't forget to check out more content on this channel, including my recent review of the Book of Rituals, also from Board and Dice, or if you want something a little bit lighter, you can check out my express review of Dixit Stellar, which is for a nice party atmosphere. Until next time, remember as always, it's only a game. Bye for now.